Your Steve Jones Show podcast is loading now. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Sunbury Motors, North 4th Street in Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. Sports talk where your voice counts. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors studio, here's Steve Jones.
All right, Yankees have tied it up in the ninth. Kiner Falefa was able to knock in Aaron Hicks.
There we go.
They did pinch hit Giancarlo Stanton in the ninth inning, but because it was after the fourth inning, he grounded to short.
IKF, baby.
So the Yankees tie it up in the ninth. Still hitting, by the way. 2 outs. 2-2. All right, let's get to our play-by-play call of the day.
72 hours ago, I was in his office in Boston. And I had not spoken for, well, it was a month. He did surgery on me the first time on my vocal cords back in, oh, God, that was back in February 15th. Then he did surgery again on June 15th. Incredible. And it's only a month ago. And it takes 6 to 8 weeks to heal. And he told me in that office, and he called the president up as well. He said, I'm going to clear him to speak at the ESPYs as long as he follows my instruction. But he needs a few more weeks yet of healing process. I had what's called precancerous dysplasia all over my vocal cords. I love you, buddy, and I thank you so much for making this happen for me today.
You probably have not met Dick Vitale. I've met him a few times, and look, he doesn't know me from the wall. But he is the same off the air as he is on the air. Anytime I've talked to him, I actually had him on the show a long time ago. And he's a good guy. He's just a good guy. He's passionate. He loves what he does. He loves the game. He loves people. He just loves people. And I'm thrilled to hear him speak again because it's just great. And again, he's a guy, he loves people. And he is off the air. He is the same as he is on the air. Great, positive, vivacious personality. So happy for him. Today's show brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, Hummel's Wharf online, sunburymotors.com for Kia Hyundai. Best in new inventory, great pre-owned inventory with the Sunbury Motors guarantee and a great service department. It takes care of routine like oil changes and also inspections and diagnostics. They handle it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, Hummel's Wharf online at sunburymotors.com. You were going to say something, I believe.
We have breaking news. Kraft Heinz is back with the Steelers, and the Heinz Red Zone is back. They reached a 5-year deal between the Steelers and Kraft Heinz to keep Heinz as a corporate partner. The Heinz Red Zone is returning, and the ketchup bottles could also be returning after they were just removed from the stadium a couple of days ago. So there you go. All seems to be somewhat right in the world again with Steeler fans.
Trying to fight back the emotion. All right. With that, we turn our attention to Neil Coulon. Sir, always a pleasure. Great to have you with us. Well, 1 week to Latrobe. 1 week to Latrobe. So, I want to actually start with the world-famous Deshaun Watson. This is not a Roger Goodell decision in the end. What do you think, after reading everything, the NFL might do with him for the upcoming season?
Let's see. I enjoy this. I point out to people I feel like I've earned an honorary graduate degree in law.
Yes.
Going over all of the ins and outs of the NFL. It's really interesting in a lot of different ways, but maddeningly frustrating because, in all honesty, the way that I read it, and I am not an expert by any stretch, I think Sue Robinson is probably going to see more splitting in half of what each side is requesting, and there's a reason for that. We have to keep in mind here, from a bargaining perspective, the collective bargaining agreement is the document they go off of. It is not a court of law.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
Judges don't want to have to step in to settle disputes between two people who have already signed an agreement covering these things. Okay, now Sue Robinson is not a judge. She's appointed to this position to solve these disputes within the CBA. Now, what it comes down to is the burden of evidence and how that is described in the CBA of what the NFL requires in order to issue a suspension.
Mm-hmm.
You might remember in the whole Deflategate fiasco, as much fun as that was, one of the big things that Roger Goodell really hammered on was they felt they had a higher standard of evidence to impose the suspension that they did. For him to have said that, it sort of suggests this is what we look for when we issue a suspension. Now, in the CBA, it says something different. They don't necessarily need as much, according to them. They kind of conflicted themselves in Deflategate because they also had mentioned it's more believable than not that this happened.
I always love that. It's more believable than not, which means they don't know.
Which it's absolutely not, rock hard evidence. We get that, and that's the NFL makes no, they're not trying to they don't want to be in a position where they're considered legal. That's not where they want to be because they'll end up in this situation. And right now, what they have is this, at best, this lowest level of evidence to suggest it, and that's through their own investigation, which is bolstered by the fact that two different grand juries failed to indict Deshaun Watson for the things that he is accused of.
That is right.
So he is not in any kind of criminal trouble. That lack of evidence is not clearly spelled out in the CBA, but I don't want to call it wishy-washy, but Goodell used the higher standard in a previous matter in which they issued a suspension that was appealed. In this case, they have less evidence than what they had then. Mm-hmm. Or this is one interpretation that Robinson can have. Also, keep in mind, the league wants a year-long suspension. The union, which is representing Union and Watson, I'm just going to call it the union. They're representing Watson.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want any suspension.
That's right.
They're disputing anything.
They're saying on the legal side of it, there was no indictment, and because of that, he should not be suspended.
Yeah, and if you look at it based on the CBA, not our opinion, not court of law, there isn't strong ground on which that Robinson can say the NFL is right. A year is appropriate. That's what it comes down to. Robinson has the ability to say yay or nay and propose what the suspension should be. The NFL is then able to appeal and kind of give whatever they want to give. But the issue with that is if you're picking nothing or a year, the evidence suggests more nothing than a year. So you really can't use a year as a final verdict. I don't think anyway. I don't think Robinson's going to see a year. I think there is enough to suggest, based on the CBA's language, past precedent, everything else that's come with it, they have enough to say something like 8 to 10 games. I'd go on the record as saying if I were betting, and as disgusting as it is to bet on something like this,
right.
I think 8 to 10 games is probably where it's going to land.
I agree with you. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be 8 to 10 games, and they're going to do it as a way of saying, see, we did something.
I think, if anything, the NFL, you got to keep in mind, they want kind of what the fans would want. I don't think the NFL collectively, certainly the owners, are very happy with the Cleveland Browns as far as the precedent that they set to give out that big of a contract to a player who's facing, at best, a questionable 2022 season. To create all of this, the NFL has to go for a year. They would look terrible if they didn't. I don't necessarily think they can get away with a year. And I don't think Robinson sees that either. So the NFL is left with the unenviable position of either up front not asking for a very severe punishment, which the fan base of the NFL is going to riot if that's the case, or having Robinson be the bad person in the situation and reduce what they want, and then override her, which is only going to create animosity with her as well as the union.
Right. Why did you bring me here? Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. What am I doing here? I gave you my reasons. You just don't accept that at all. And yes, it is collectively bargained that that's what you want to do. But at the same time, this is the biggest situation in which you had disputes, and I was brought in to handle this. You failed to make your point as well as the situation merited, and according to me, you're wrong, but you're telling me that I'm wrong. So, okay. It seems to set kind of a bad precedent, but keep this in mind. This is going to be critically important. Dan Snyder has gotten himself in a little bit of trouble.
A little.
That's a slight problem when one of the owners is going back and forth arguing with Congress over whether or not he should testify.
Yeah.
You're in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a bad look, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there were thousands upon thousands of emails tied to Snyder and the circus operation that he's running over there that were coming out, and the NFL, right, wrong, or not, decided John Gruden is the one that they want to pin all this on. That's a separate lawsuit, okay? Right. So Snyder, who probably has dirt on every owner, is whether they get to a point where they have to force him to sell, that's going to be bad for everybody.
Right.
Not a good situation. And a lot of that control is out of their hands. Congress may tell them they have to. Right. From what I understand, it's not necessarily going to come to that, but they're in trouble, and they fined him $10 million. I don't think the current political climate is going to appreciate that as much as Goodell thinks that they will. We'll find out what happens, but that's another war on another front. Gruden wrote a bunch of nasty stuff that he shouldn't have in an email to somebody who worked within the Washington organization at that point.
Right.
Gruden wasn't even an NFL employee. And if you go by what the media have reported on this, Gruden's the one at fault for the whole thing.
Right.
He had his career destroyed.
Yeah.
Okay? He had his contract wiped out. He got fired with or without cause. That's going to be another lawsuit that they're going to have to deal with.
Yep.
And don't think for a second that Gruden appreciates this a whole lot either. All of these things paint the NFL in an extremely precarious legal situation. Do they want to create more bad blood and have this whole saga with Watson continue? When, to be honest, as weird as this is the one situation the NFL, either way, really didn't do anything. They weren't the cause of their own problem this time. Watson's the one they can shut and move on. The other ones they can't. Those are still on the horizon. So to be honest, I think they just take what Robinson says and they move on. I think they know it's going to be 8 to 10 games because I don't think they can justify the year that they want.
Well, again, there's two parts to this. One, they can look at everybody and say, well, we put her in charge. She decided. That's one. So that gets them off the hook. Number two, let's not discount that it's also a woman deciding it. And I think at that point they go, okay, as for Snyder, you need 24 owners to get rid of him. And like you said, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can come up with 24.
I think that the NFL has been amazingly steadfast in their unity with each other. The Jerry Richardson situation broke a lot of precedent in a very different situation for a lot of different reasons.
Yes.
This, however, and Dan Snyder has never even come close to suggesting that he is interested in selling the team. Richardson,
not even close.
Some people said it was kind of the point. He wanted to move on. His family could still run it, or they wanted to liquidate and get out of it. It was a difficult situation. You look at the ownership situation in Denver. Look how long that took, and that was when the owner died.
Right.
You know, the legal battle to control it was intense.
Right, because
extremely expensive. Because
of the way he worded his will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The back and forth over the value of owning an NFL team is the value of that team is way above and beyond just the $4 billion that it's worth. Its power, its control. In the NFL, they are so tightly regimented in an effort to, I don't want to say protect one another, but they understand the meaning of united we stand, divided we fall.
Right.
They don't break ranks with each other. They don't discuss those kinds of things openly. They are very, very contained. Snyder, there's if you look at it just logically as a human being, it's really hard to imagine any of them like Daniel Snyder all that much. And Daniel, among the many things that Snyder has committed or is accused of committing, he stole money from them. I mean, I'm not sure how often many of them you mess around with the gate numbers, but that's what Snyder was doing. It's like, here comes a point. This guy's just a walking liability. I mean, how many problems has he caused the rest of us over the last 3 years that we know about? You know, what else is there? I can't imagine they want him to continue, but I don't think they're able to get people to take that kind of a stand, to create that kind of a precedent, because maybe they're doing a bunch of other stuff that people they don't want other people to know about. And Snyder can go tell everybody about it. I'm sure he's got a tell-all book that is waiting for the opportunity to publish. And two, to create a precedent to that, to create the scenario. And I remember Mark Cuban of the Dallas Mavericks said this back when Donald Sterling was getting booted from the NBA. Do we want to create a situation in which selling the team is a legitimate punishment that we'll have to be publicly called to do in every situation that people don't like? You can't close that box. And I'm not necessarily sure the NFL would want to do that. They'd like all of this to go away. That's why they fined him a huge amount of money. I understand that it's probably not a whole lot to Daniel Snyder, but $10 million is $10 million. That's by far the biggest fine they've given to an owner over anything that Snyder's associated with. So you're fighting all of these fronts legally, and I think that the Gruden situation and the Snyder situation are two that they can't control as well as they would like. The Watson thing can go away if they get, exactly to your point, the woman of prominence that is mutually hired between them and the union. They made their argument. She made her decision. They can just go with that. And I really think that's what they'll end up doing.
Right. Yeah, I do too. And again, the power is going to be in the fact that he has not been indicted. All right.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I think most people, when they look at the legal system, because you're before a grand jury, they'll tell you, and there's no defense presented, that it's, quote, much easier to get an indictment. And the fact that they couldn't is going to be, I think, back up exactly what you said.
None of it is enough to reach a higher burden of evidence. And the NFL can't provide that. They investigated it themselves. They looked into it. It's an ugly situation. Nobody likes it. I don't think anybody thinks Deshaun Watson is purely innocent of any of these things. And his behavior, and we've talked about this before as well, I find any ex-player speaking anonymously or on the record, they're going to tell you that franchise quarterbacks that are made, that have those kinds of contracts, do not go trolling for massage therapists on Instagram. Okay,
right.
They do the opposite of that. It's shady. In any way you look at this, it's shady.
Yeah.
At the same time,
right.
though, there isn't enough there from a legal perspective.
It's under the category of it's more believable than not.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe they should get Ted Wells to write a report. Okay. That's.
That name still sends chills up my spine. The amount of time and effort. Oh my God!
I interviewed
like
400 people.
Science all over again.
I interviewed 400 people. Just interview the 7 or 8 that are relevant. Move on. Will you cry? Goodness sakes.
We're
out
going
there.
after the wrong things here. I mean, he was
What are we
literally
doing
trying to define physics in this. Like, you didn't need this much. It was a mess.
Right. We interviewed 400 people. Like, so what?
Yeah, it's great. You know, I read 20 articles on this, and that's way too much. You know,
Yeah.
The issue in many ways is the NFL, I think anyway, just has to stand up sometimes and say, there's not much we can do. We are not a governing body.
Exactly. This is where the collective bargaining agreement comes into play.
It's
and
the whole point.
This has been negotiated with the union. He is a union member. And, you know, thus there are times where you look around and say, okay, guess what? We don't have the ability because of this contract to do what you hope we should do.
Yep. And it's difficult because you don't want to throw anybody else under the bus.
Exactly.
Like John Gruden.
Right.
But at the same time, there comes a point that you kind of have to say, look, Deshaun Watson's the one that did this, not a
right. Yeah.
Okay, go after him. Right. It's honestly the way I feel about it in this case. Like I said before, there aren't many instances in which the NFL is involved with something that they are not culpable for in some way.
Yeah.
I understand that he works there and people are outraged and angry, and I believe they should be, but I don't know to the extent the employer is that responsible for it.
Right.
They're trying to do what they can the way that's collectively bargained. And if they go with 8 games, they go with 8 games. I don't know what the right number is. I just know that based on the agreement that both sides have entered into, they don't quite have enough to say a year, but maybe something is warranted, and that's up to Sue L. Robinson. And I think that's the way that it's going to go.
And Gruden, for example, is a member of management, not a part of a union.
Yep.
Snyder,
Gruden wasn't even in the NFL at that point.
Exactly.
It's just a Snyder strategic decision.
And Snyder's an owner, and they do have a procedure in place to remove him, but they can't get the 24. So
to open that door, they're not going to want to do that. If they get compelled to do it from the same legislatures that the NFL is kind of railroaded and getting all these stadiums built, then maybe it's a different story. Once again, this just kind of goes back to the sins of the father. You know, you can't continue to get away with these things. It's going to catch up with you eventually. I think with Snyder, it very well could be that the strong arming of, for example, the Minnesota State Legislature to get U.S. Bank Stadium built in Minneapolis. Right. That happened in New Jersey. All of these things, you're creating enemies in doing it. And I think that's going to kind of come back to haunt them in situations like this. Dan Snyder, the fact that Dan Snyder is appearing in front of Congress is just unbelievable to me. Yeah. Oh man, you've got to just get in line. I mean, you're really destroying a lot of value for everybody who's involved with this. I mean, anybody associated with the NFL. Yeah. And to do it in such a reckless and careless way is really astonishing to me, even for the NFL. And Snyder has a history of all this stuff. If they can't get 24, I feel like they're only a vote or two off. They can't be far from it because this is just not working. I mean, he's a liability. I can't put it any better than that. You're not going to advance anywhere with that guy again.
This is Donald Sterling under different circumstances.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay. My friend, thanks so much. Appreciate it. We'll probably revisit some of this again next week.
Yeah, I'm sure more will happen between now and then, maybe today. Who knows? But thanks for having me. You guys have a good day.
All right. Neil Coulon. Another. You read between the lines. These are mostly anti-Yankee rants. Astros won it, by the way. You do know it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yordan Alvarez scored the game-winning run, or he was involved in it. He was ranked, by the way, as the American League MVP over Aaron Judge by Jason Stark.
I love Jason Stark, but he's got that one wrong.
How many times you watched Yordan Alvarez play this year?
Every time he's played the Yankees.
And he's destroyed them every time. All right, we'll come back with more in a moment. On News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Taking your calls at 800-795-9565. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. Now, from the Sunbury Motors Studio, here's Steve Jones.
It's always great working with people who have just a narrow focus. If Yordan Alvarez were a Yankee and Judge were with the Astros, you'd be telling Yordan Alvarez was the best player in the American League.
He should be in the MVP conversation. He's had a great year and he's killed the Yankees, but Aaron Judge is the MVP of the American League this year.
The other guy's hitting 24 points higher.
But Aaron Judge has the better RBI and home run numbers, and he's had many more clutch hits.
More than Giancarlo Stanton? All right, so the show's too easy. Today's show brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street, Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15, almost wharf online at sunburymotors.com. All right. So let's talk a little hockey here for a moment. Let's bring in Bob Grove. Pittsburgh. Bob, welcome back.
Steve, great to be with you.
All right. So a little revamping here, which is interesting. He may be 34, but I really like the acquisition of Jeff Petrie. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I've got no problem with what Ron Hextall did, this weekend and changing around the look of his defense and getting 22-year-old Ty Smith and Jeff Petrie, he's a known quantity. I mean, he's been good for double-digit goals, 40-plus points each of the last 4 years in Montreal. Now, he fell off that production level this past season, but let's remember he was on the worst team in the league. He was also, he's living up there. His family's in the States. There was a lot going on with him, sort of behind the scenes where he just wasn't comfortable in Montreal and wanted out. I mean, look, Steve, when you lose as much as they did, it's never good. Mm-hmm. And so the Penguins get him. He's got 3 years left. He's bigger. He's not afraid to hit people. And like I said, he's a known quantity. He's creative. He can provide you some offense. And we'll see, how Ty Smith works in coming from the Devils. He's only 22. He's still learning the pro game.
Still learning the pro game, but I feel like Bobby brings some versatility to that defense.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at this defense right now, they're all going to be 30-plus by the time you get to next spring in the playoffs, except for Smith and Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who the Penguins have, he's a first-round pick in 2017, and they got him a couple of years ago from Arizona, and he's never been an NHL regular, but he signed a one-way contract with the Penguins this season. It's now or never for him to show he can be an everyday NHL player. He's only 23. Yeah. So those two guys will give them some mobility, and certainly Ty Smith. I mean, 2 years ago as a rookie, he led all rookies in the league in points among defensive rookies. Mm-hmm. And he's smaller, but he really moves the puck well. He skates well, and he had a little bit of a rougher go this time around. But I think way too much for me has been read into what happened to him this past season. Again, playing on a non-playoff team. Yeah. But this isn't for me, he doesn't have to bounce back from last season. Like last season, that's what happens for most young players is you might go okay for a while and then you take a step back. And he's creative, and I'm anxious to see what he brings because the Penguins have 9 defensemen, Steve.
Yeah.
And he's the only one. He's the only one they could send to the American League without clearing waivers. And I don't necessarily expect him to end up there, but I mean, I know from past experience that does become a factor.
No question it becomes a factor. That's why in baseball, for example, you'll see, gee, why is he on the Worcester shuttle? Well, that's because they can't with that guy. And it's the same thing with the AHL and the NHL. I also think there's another element. You talked about being on non-playoff teams. This is where, to me, the Crosby, Gensel, guys like that, having some high-caliber firepower brings out the best in some other players. And I think that Ty Smith is in that position where it might bring out the best in him because it's not going to be as much on his shoulders.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, if you look now at their lineup, we've talked about Petrie, and of course Letang is back, and we know that those two guys, and so Letang's numbers speak for himself. He's coming off a career year. So if you're Ty Smith, first thing you're thinking is, when I get that puck up to one of the forwards on this team, something's more likely to happen than it was in New Jersey last season.
Yeah, no question. All right, so what did you think of how the Malkin thing turned out?
It was really interesting, and for me, it had Sidney Crosby's fingerprints all over it. I mean, there's been reporting that the week before Sid had flown down to Florida to see Gino and talk to him, and I think probably that was before Malkin said, "Look, I'm going to market," and he was obviously very frustrated with the pace of things, the offers that he felt he maybe should have had. And then, at the last minute, right before free agency starts, he accepts the offer that was already there. So a little bit of frustration from him. But I mean, I felt going into the free agency day on the 13th that it was going to take something crazy to keep him because he seemed absolutely committed to going to market. And look, he would have had interest, Steve. Here's the thing. I don't think anyone would have given him 4 years. He probably got 3 max, maybe 2, and maybe more money. But, like I said, I think probably Crosby was involved in getting the parties back together again. And here's the thing about Letang, Malkin, Crosby. These 3, they really have a sense of what their legacy is. Like, they think about it. And we saw some of the emotion when Sid played his 1,000th game last year that really sort of came out of nowhere. Like, these 3 want to go out together and believe their team is better if they stay together. And if you're Ron Hextall, you have to pay attention to that. Like, you got to keep those guys to some degree. You have to be concerned with keeping them happy and productive. And it's not about Malkin's productivity, Steve. If you go back the last 5 seasons, since the Penguins won their last cup, his regular season production versus Sid's, they're virtually the same. Right. Sid's been a better playoff. He's been a bit better in the playoffs than Gino. But the whole thing with Malkin, it's not about that. It's not about he hasn't done the job. It's about what can we depend on him as far as availability going forward. He's 36. He'll be 36 next week. He's missing like a dozen games every year in the last 2 years. Then, of course, wrecked by a knee injury, part of one, part of the other. And they're just worried that he's not going to be available because that's been his history the last 5 or 6 years. He misses at least a dozen games every year. Can he take care of himself? Can he stay relatively healthy? That's the concern.
It's interesting about the 3 of them wanting to stay together. That's a 60s and 70s mentality in every sport. What is it about these 3 that, Bob, why they have that mentality that is a throwback?
Well, first of all, I think it is really unique. I mean, it's absolutely unique. They've played together for 16 years, and so it's going to be 20 by the time you get to the end of it. So this has never happened in the National Hockey League before, 3 teammates together for that long. It's already a record. Right. And I think they're approaching one of the baseball marks, I believe. This has been done by somebody in baseball a little bit longer. But why do they have that mentality? First of all, I think winning when you've won 3 cups and you've been to 4 finals together, it means something. But let's remember that they're right there together in age. Malkin is 1 year older than, and Letang and Crosby were taken in the same draft, so they sort of came up together. Like, even though Letang was drafted the same season as Crosby, of course he didn't play that year in the National Hockey League, but he came up the next year when Gino was a rookie and played briefly. So these 3 have just been through it all together. We've seen Letang do it. We've seen Russ do it. We know we've seen Crosby do it. What I'm talking about is leaving money on the table to make it possible to stay together. These 3 have really hit it off personally over the years, and so they want to do everything they can to stay together. It's a really unique situation.
You add in the 2-year deal for Casey DeSmith. You add in the Brian Rust deal, the draft. What kind of offseason, in your opinion, has Ron Hextall had?
Well, for a guy who's trying to give the Penguins a chance to make one more run, he's had an unbelievable season. I mean, if you'd have said back when the day after the Penguins got eliminated, most people in Pittsburgh were, look, Rust, Letang, Malkin, no way he can bring them all back. A lot of people in town didn't want them all back, especially they've been focused on Malkin, and he's lost a step, right? So they didn't think it was possible to bring them all back. He's not only done that, but he's brought back Ricard Raquel on top of that, and he's added some experience on defense. And he talked a lot about he felt they needed to get bigger, and they've done that. So I think he's had a really good offseason. I mean, we'll see about Owen Pickering, their first-round pick. He looks very promising, but every first-round pick looks promising like weeks after you've made it.
The Pirates drafted yesterday. Pirate fans are beside themselves. You're not going to see him for years.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Exactly, we'll see. Which now brings us to Tristan Jarry.
Yeah.
So he's, I think, 1 year left, Bob, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. He has 1 year left, can be extended this offseason.
So how do you see that playing out with him? Because he obviously is the number one guy.
I think the Penguins, look, Hextall said he wanted to get through all this stuff before he started thinking about who he can extend, because Dumoulin can get an extension and so can Teddy Bluger. But I think the Penguins are going to extend them. I really do. It's unfortunate for everybody, including, obviously, Tristan Jarry, that he didn't get the chance to respond to the playoff failure the year before. He was really good in the season, a little better in the first half than the second half, but taken all in. He had a response to what happened to him in the playoffs, and it was a really positive, good response, and I think the Penguins saw from him what they wanted to see, and we can make the case. It's still true. We got to see him do it in the playoffs, unfortunately. That's still true, but I think the Penguins like him. I think they're going to offer him an extension.
This may not be an easy one to answer, but the Fenway Group has spent money at Liverpool. The Fenway Group, as we all know over the years, has spent money with the Red Sox. Do you sense there was an influence that helped Ron Hextall to do what he's done in the offseason?
Absolutely. They demand that you're running a team that has a chance to win. That's how they operate.
Yes.
I mean, and look, they're realists. They know that look at some of the Sox teams haven't been that great,
right.
but they're realists, and they know it's crazy to think it's going to happen every year, but they don't have a cap in baseball to worry about. And here they do, but there's absolutely pressure and expectation from them that you've got these guys who are going to the Hall of Fame, and you're not tearing it all down while we're here. And for sure, that's a factor. And that's we've talked about this before. That's Hextall's challenge is, every time you do this, Steve, that the bottom is going to fall out at some point. We all know that. It's going to happen. Look at the Red Wings. Look at okay, that's the cycle of sports. That's what happens. And yes, the Penguins, if they get to the playoffs this season, will have a dozen guys who are 30 or older. That's all true. And someday it might get ugly, and that's what Hextall's trying to prevent. But I've always maintained that as long as you have Crosby, you have a chance. And even at 35, and I will tell people too, Steve, Tampa, 2 years ago when they won the Cup, they had 10 guys who were 30 or older, and the year before when they won the first of those back-to-backs, they had 11 guys who were 30 or older. So it can be done, but it's quite difficult.
There's also been another factor that has entered into this. It's the factor of time. when the pandemic came up, of course, to finish the season, they went up to Canada, played in Toronto, played in Edmonton, and it ended in September? I think it ended in September.
Yep.
Right, and then boom, quick turnaround, boom, and played the season. This year, they had, the Olympics were built in, and the finish was later for everybody. But during that period of time where they were supposed to be the Olympics, they made up games because of COVID. What can it mean for the Penguins in the age factor you talked about, that now for the first time in a while there's going to be a more normal rest cycle before this begins?
I think it's important, especially for these guys we're talking about who are in their late 30s. I mean, they, no matter how well they try and train, hockey players are really creatures of habit. In the last few years, and that's why I give Tampa credit for winning in the bubble. Mm-hmm. Everybody's like, well, you didn't play a full season and you had this thing going on in the bubble, but it was hard. It was really hard for players to do that, and so it's big for the Penguins to have basically 6 months off right now to get ready for next season, and for Malkin to be able to train, especially because last summer he couldn't train the way he normally did. Obviously, he missed the whole first half of the season, so. I think it's big for them to have a normal kind of season, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they maybe sometimes they will help themselves with that, and maybe you got 3 and 4 back-to-back games. Maybe you give some guys a day off here or there.
It's interesting. I always love you didn't do this, or this wasn't quite. That's always from not 30,000, 50,000 feet, right? Put a line through it. You didn't live it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always amazing when you don't have to live it. You can make all the comments you want.
Right. No, it's very difficult to get to the top of the best league in the world, and that's why I have so much respect for what Tampa was able to do. And my God, nearly do it 3 years in a row. Are you kidding me? Just tremendous. And they'll be back. I mean, they're going to be a factor this coming season. They will be.
No, they will be. Yeah, I agree. Not only that, but they had to go through the expansion draft and lose guys through things. There's a lot of factors that enter into something for a team that won 11 consecutive Stanley Cup Series.
Rounds. Yep. Yeah, it was amazing to see, and so it's doable. And like I said, they were largely a veteran team. The only thing about this with the Penguins is they got the band back together. And Sid's got 3 years left, and Letang has now 6 years to go. And Malkin has 4, but trust me, if they're going to make another run, Steve, it's not going to be 4 years from now.
No.
It's either next season or the season after. That's what I realistically look at and say, I think this is what's real is it's got to sort of be now or never one of the next couple seasons. Or after that, I just don't think it's almost impossible.
Bob, it's always great talking hockey in July. It is. I love it. Bob, thanks so much. Appreciate you, my friend.
All right, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Bob Grove. Yeah, Bob. Always great to have him on the show. I think he said Aaron Judge was going to be a Penguin. But, no.
No, senor! No, senor! No, senor!
He's not playing in the Bronx. All right. John Crispin with us tomorrow here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
When car repairs get difficult.
Well, I just don't know.
Me neither.
We get good. Sunbury Motors. More than quality new and used cars, Sunbury Motors specializes in complicated auto repair diagnosis. They can handle intricate repairs and even complete auto body with service open Monday through Friday, 7 till 4. And Sunbury Motors has made simple repairs easy. Maintaining your vehicle is necessary. Finding the time to do it is difficult. Welcome to Sunbury Motors Quick Lane. Open 7 till 4, Monday through Friday. Just walk in or call ahead. Relax in their remodeled waiting room with Wi-Fi, beverages, and snacks. While Sunbury Motors factory trained techs take care of your oil change, tire alignments, brakes, and inspections. Quick Lane, 6:30 to 6, Monday through Friday, Saturday, 6:30 till 2. Sunbury Motors, Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury. And Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. We take the out of auto repair.